Okay, welcome everyone. So tonight, we're part 4, and we're going to move to the Sephardic world. So in the last class, we looked at Rashi's family, which of course is Ashkenazic. And in our previous series, we spoke a little bit about the difference between the Ashkenazi and Sephardi world in terms of how Torah developed. And some of that's going to play out here tonight as well, in the way Sephardic women are learning. So we do have some Torah scholarship in the Sephardic world, although it seems to me that most we found so far were on the Ashkenazic side. Nonetheless, you're going to see how it's a little bit different in the way it plays out. So the first person we're going to meet actually isn't really a Sephardi technically, but maybe, in the sense that the first person we're meeting is here, Osnat Barzani Mizrahi. Her father's last name Barzani, and her husband Mizrahi. Now they live in Kurdistan, in the Ottoman Empire. As you can see, so the father Shmuel, who we're going to talk about now, and then they'll give us the background to Osnat is. So he's born around 1560. We'll see soon. There's different opinions as to when he was born, but let's just go with this view that he was born in the 1560s. When we get there, I'll tell you why there might be thinking that he was born much later, but let's just assume he was born in the 1560 in Kurdistan. So Kurdistan is, if you go to the next page, you can actually, oops, it's quite a few pages late. Wait a second. Where's my map of Kurdistan? Can I pass it?
I didn't see a map.
Here we are, yeah, on the third page, on page 3. So you can see there, the current map of the world, certainly that part of the world, is kind of made up by the British. They colonized and then carved it up and randomly gave it to people. But that's not the way the locals feel about it. The locals are tribal. They have their own connections to the land that go way back, and we're still suffering from these conflicts still today because of this mismatch of who belongs where. So you can see Kurdistan as this yellow, which is partially in Iraq, but also Syria and also Turkey and also Iran. It's this whole area. And the area that we're looking at, there's 2 cities specifically we're going to be looking at, which I zoomed into over here. The red dot there, that's Mosul, which would be like Kurdistan, but closer towards Baghdad. And there's another city which is a little bit farther up north. It's in the mountains. It's called Amadi or Madia. Ahmadiyya. Those are the 2 cities we're looking at. And those are the cities that are relevant in this Rabbi Shmuel Barzani's life. He's called Adoni, which means my master. He was given that honorific by his community because they really looked at him as the master of all. So they called him Adoni. And sometimes you can actually, like his name will show up as not even Shmuel Barzani, but Shmuel Adoni. Even though his last name is Barzani, but he's kind of like referred to as Shmuel Adoni. Okay, so he's born in 1560 in this area of Kurdistan, either Amadi or Mosul. I don't know if Mosul counts as Kurdistan, but it's certainly on the border of Kurdistan. And at this time, it's covered by the Ottoman Empire. He's a halachic decisive. He writes halacha. He's a Kabbalist. If I'm not mistaken, he had some family who got caught up with the Shabtai Tzvi movement. Some cousins, if I'm not mistaken, who got caught up with the Shabtai Tzvi movement because they were Kabbalists also, and they bought into that whole story, which is still going on at this point. And he was a revered rabbi. So to the point that even Reb Chaim Vital, who's the prodigal student of Arizal, who has a memoir called, can't remember now, but he has a memoir, and in it he describes a visit from this Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel at one point, as I read here on the bottom here, he moved a bunch of times because of tribal rebellions. You had the local tribes constantly rebelling against the Ottoman Turks, who are like the colonizers of those days, and they're constantly dealing with that. So he has to move around as a result of that, and he ends up at one point in Damascus, where he meets Rabbi Chaim Vital, and Rabbi Chaim Vital writes about that meeting and writes very highly of this Rabbi Shmuel Barzani. Now he's like almost I'm not super familiar with Kurdistani Jewish history, to be perfectly honest. I kind of did some reading about it in preparation for this, but he's like referred to as like the biggest figure in Jewish Kurdistan history, certainly in the last 200 years, the last couple hundred years. And that's because he literally founded a number of yeshivas. When he traveled around, every place he went to, he started a new yeshiva and would fund it and ran it. Sorry. Someone was in the office a few minutes ago. So he literally started these yeshivas all over the place, all over Kurdistan, seeing the decline in Torah study at the time. He started building these yeshivas. And all the entire region, for the next couple hundred years, any Judaism that existed was his students, or his students' students. They're from his school. The shachtim, the rabbis, the chazanim, whatever religious infrastructure there was in Kurdistan and overflowing into Iraq came from him. Right, so Iraq, the center being Baghdad, is still the center in Iraq. That's where the Jewish center is. And from there, they have their people. But as you go further north, you saw the map, toward Kurdistan, it was Mosul and then Ahmadiyya. Those would have been the two centers. And his big yeshiva was in Mosul. So while he's running away from town to town because of these rebellions, in each place he arrives to, he founds a yeshiva. And they continue to operate even after his life, as we'll see. So he had he had only one child, a daughter, Osnat, and he taught her Torah, as we'll see. And she was referred to as a Tanait. Tana is, that's how they refer to her. The community referred to her as a Tanait. Tana, of course, is in Hebrew, Tana is a scholar of the Mishnah, and she was referred to as a Tanait, like the feminine.
Was it the age of the Tanaim?
No, we're 1560s, hundreds of years later. An honorific. That was like the title they gave her, I guess. Instead of Rabbanit, they called her Tanait, something like that. So she would later marry Rabbi Shmuel's, her father's prodigal student, Rabbi Yaakov Mizrahi, and that's who I think was even a cousin, if I'm not mistaken. And he dies, at least according to one version, on the 23rd of Shvat in the year 1633. In the center, these pictures are, this in the middle is the handwriting of Rabbi Shmuel. On the left, this is the burial spot of Osnat in Ahmadiyya, in Kurdistan. In Ahmadiyya, I'm assuming, even though as we'll see, most of her active life was in Mosul, where she ran the yeshiva, which we'll talk about. I'm guessing she was buried in Ahmadiyya because that's where her father was buried. In Ahmadiyya, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Ahmadiyya, I'm not sure. And then on the right, that's just the illustrated photo of Kurdistani Jews. Okay, so this is the world that Osnat grows up in. Her father's this leading big rabbi who's reviving Jewish life in Kurdistan. And she's the only child, so her father's teaching her Torah. There are a lot of the books that describe Jewish life in Kurdistan from the older memoirs include folklore about both Rabbi Shmuel and Osnat, including kameas. Kameas are those amulets that people would write for healing. A lot of them have her name in it in that region. She became a sort of figure that in the legends of these areas they were talked about. Osnat. All kinds of stories. I read one story. It's hard to know what's folklore, what's real, what's not real. So when we get to the actual storyline, we're going to stick to the stuff that I know is for sure is real, and you'll see how I know that they're real. But some of the folklore include stories like she was once on her balcony cleaning her linen or something, or hanging up or drying her, I guess, or whatever, laundry, and a non-Jewish guy comes and wants to have his way, and she says some name of Hashem and freezes him in midair. Everybody comes and watches. Oh my gosh, what's this guy doing? Frozen in midair, until the king comes, and she only releases him from this spell when the king or the local landlord, whoever it is, promises to give him the justice due by the law, and then she releases him. He's tried and he's hung. It's like the kind of legends that exist in these regions about this family, including this woman Osnat. Now, what's cool.
First time in Jewish history do you hear the name Osnat?
I don't know. I'm pronouncing it Osnat, but if you look at the Kurdistani pronunciation, it's Aznat. Aznat. They pronounce it properly, the thuf with the th. It says Athnat.
The burial, the caver, obviously her name is there, so you know
No,
it's her.
I wrote that. I wrote Kever
No,
Osnat.
I don't mean that's her name. I mean her name is somewhere there, so.
I assume so, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
is this how everybody at that time was buried? Is she buried specially because of her status?
I don't know. It's
Is
possible.
this like a regular cemetery?
Probably special, because you do read in some of the memoirs of the elders in those areas about pilgrimages that the community would do to her gravesite.
Her gravesite.
So it's obviously it was a place they would go to.
Right, but you notice that it's different than the usual.
It's
above,
it's
like above
I don't know if it's above ground necessarily. It's probably below ground, and then they built this like thing on top, kind of like you have on in Israel. You have in like Har Manuchat or Har Hazeisim. You'll have that. We'll have like
You see that
in Israel. You see this kind of thing. Yeah. So I don't know that she's buried above ground. I think it's below ground. Although there is a Jewish tradition of above ground burial in caves. Yeah, in caves. They were like.
They were in caves and they were above
That's
ground.
correct. They were above ground, like in slots in these caves.
Right. They
But
were
that's not what this looks like, though.
in spots.
You know, a lot of places in Israel you see it like that. Yeah.
You see all those.
Instead of having a tomb that stands upward, it lies down like that, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, this, according to all the Google searches, all the pictures I saw of her grave all match the same thing. So I'm guessing this is correct.
Okay.
Okay, so this is her background. Now, what's amazing about how we know about her life is from this guy, Jacob Mann, who lived in 1880. You can see his dates: 1888 to 1940. Born in Galicia, actually to a Belza family. Obviously, he was a little bit more open-minded and ended up traveling. And I think he got a position as a rabbi in London at some point. But then the war broke out, the World War I, that is. So he ended up in America and joined Hebrew Union College, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think is conservative, right? But I think it's conservative, but it's more old school conservative, which was much more traditional than the current conservative. So he was an academic and doing a lot of writing and researching. Now, in the 1750s, they discovered the famous Cairo Geniza, the greatest repository of Jewish history and Jewish manuscript ever to be discovered in Cairo, some 400,000 plus manuscripts. There are so many, and it's so vast that they're still searching through them till this very day. So, if you want to just see this for a second, because
Who
this
has
is,
the ownership of it?
they're in different universities. But this, you can do this yourself. This is a website called scribesofthecairoGeniza.org. And essentially what they do is they're crowdsourcing it. So you can join the process of deciphering their texts. Because of how many there are, it's impossible to get through all of it by a few people in a lab. All the good stuff has been done already. So like the Rambams, they went through it and they find stuff, they recognize the scholars and they already did all that stuff. But there's still thousands and thousands of scripts. So I know Hebrew, right? So you can do, let's say, easy Hebrew. Let's just skip this. So they're putting up this text and they're asking you if you want to decipher it. So you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can pan, and you can add transcript. Because they're literally crowdsourcing the work because of just how much there is. I don't even know what I'm looking at here. This looks like a list of names of some sort. I don't know. Anyway, every time you click on it, another random manuscript will show up asking if you want to help us decipher what it is. It's very cool. Yeah.
If I don't remember correctly, they found it in a old synagogue, in a room that was walled up.
Where am I?
Where they found all of it?
They found it, if I remember correctly, here it is. If I remember correctly, they found it in a attic of a small little shul in Cairo.
Yeah.
And they opened the door, and the attic was basically just one big massive geniza. Instead of, I guess, burying it.
Looked there before. This was
No, it's in the 1750s. Some explorer, and the first one, it first went to Oxford Union, I think. I think it's there officially, or maybe, Cambridge. It was in England for sure.
They took everything.
And it's still, I mean, as you can see, it's still not done.
Right.
Anyway, so this Jacob Mann did some work on that, and he uncovered quite a few letters written during and around that time from Kurdistan, the Kurdistani Jewish community, including letters from Osnat. So you have like now documentation backing up, corroborating the story of this woman that existed in the folklore, the tradition of the locale. Obviously, the kind of folklore stories of her freezing someone in the air is not there, but you still have letters of her scholarship and of her life. And this is the name of the book that he publishes it, Texts and Studies in Jewish History and Literature. And I found it online somewhere, so here's what we have from that. Okay, so here I show the region. Okay, so he collects a bunch of documents, publishes in this book called Texts and Studies, and he does some work like local, giving context and the storyline to what everything is, but for the most part, he just leaves the documents as they are. Okay, so in his introduction to some 8 or 9 or 10 documents that are connected to the Kurdistani Jews, he gives like an overview of what they learned about Kurdistan and what they know about Kurdistan to give context to these letters. And he reads like this. In the 16th century, this is the number 1560, right? The father was born in 1560. So 16th century, we have in Mosul a prominent scholar by the name of Jacob ben Yehuda Mizrahi. That would be the husband of Osnat. He seems to have originated from Babylonia, probably Baghdad, as the description as the designation Mizrahi indicates. Not sure why that is. For a time, he lived in Imadia, that's that place, Amadi, as the local rabbi, and trained several disciples, who in turn became the spiritual leaders of various communities in Kurdistan. For some reason or other, Jacob moved to Mosul, where he maintained a sort of yeshiva. Okay, we'll get to the full story about that in a moment. In his educational work, he was aided by his learned wife, the daughter of the scholar Samuel, famous in Mosul and Kurdistan. She would teach the yeshiva while her husband was occupied with his own study, and after his death endeavored to maintain the school till her young son, Samuel, would grow up, her son named after her father. This yeshiva was greatly dependent on outside help, and numerous appeals for support were sent out by Jacob and later on by his wife. The appeals, however, seem to have met with meager success. So those are the documents we're going to be looking at. There's the letters that both, we'll actually look at two letters. There's some letters that come from the husband, Yaakov, trying to fundraise money for the yeshivas. And we're going to look at a letter from Osnat herself, trying to fundraise for the yeshiva, and then from her son, Shmuel. So let's see. And these letters will tell us about her.
Her son was named after, by then they named
That's right. It could be her father passed away already. I don't know. I don't know if he named him after her father while he was still alive. I don't know. Okay, so this is, yeah. So I mentioned I don't know if I started saying this before. I don't know if you can count them as Sephardi necessarily.
Yeah,
Iraqi Jews don't necessarily, they necessarily went through Spain. It's possible they did because in 1492, right when they're expelled, and the Jews of Spain end up all over, in the places where they dominate, like say in North Africa, it basically becomes, they overrun the local culture. We do have like in some of the tshuva, some literature about like the struggles between the locals trying to maintain their way of Jewish life and not be overrun. But essentially the Sephardim over time just took over these areas. So a North African Jew will identify as Sephardi even if theoretically they can trace, none of their lineage goes back to Spain. But as you go farther east, that becomes less and less the case. So the Iranian Jews will not call themselves Sephardim. Certainly the Yemenite Jews won't, right? And even not with the Iraqi or the Lebanese Jews. But the North African Jews will pretty much all call themselves Sephardi, even if their great-grandparents never stepped foot in Sfarad, never stepped foot in Spain. So it is possible that this family is Sephardi, but not necessarily, and probably not, actually.
That's what they call themselves Mizrahi.
They're Mizrahi, right, which is Eastern Jews, right? They're Eastern.
Yeah, it's like families that in Iraq maybe that are
Correct.
there since
Some of them could have been there.
all the time.
I just read someone who claims that a certain town in Iran still has Jews from the First Temple period.
Right, but the question
That's what he claims.
if
Anyway.
if you're not considered Sephardic, do you follow Sephardic tradition or do you follow?
Oh, so they have their own traditions. They have their own. Some of them have been stronger. Some of them have been less strong. So look, we're learning now in Kurdistan. For a while it waned out, and the Shmuel came and brought it back, right? So and now you have scholars who are going through the old things, trying to find what are the Kurdistani customs. How many Jews today identify as Kurdistani Jews and want to stick to these Kurdistani customs? I don't know. But I know, for example, in the Iranian community, it's a very big work right now to pull back old school Iranian Jewish custom because now it's a growing community, right? The Syrians for sure have their own separate minhagim, separate from the Sephardim or anybody else. So I don't know. But I don't know to what degree today Kurdistani Jews is a thing where they have their own customs. But I'm sure that if they looked for it, they would find. I'm sure.
It's really a misnomer to say Sephardim.
It's not. That's right. It's just.
Sephardim aren't really
That's right.
Sephardim.
It's just
No,
not.
I know, but usually
It's just not Ashkenaz. That's all.
They're not Ashkenaz.
It's like you know those memes about the American geography. There's like the green that's American, and everything else. It's all That's Ashkenaz. I think a little bit.
Yeah, they identify as
No, I mean a little. What's the word? Self-deprecating humor, right? Like for us, there's Ashkenaz and everybody else. That's
Right.
not the case.
That's not the case for them.
It's not the case at all.
There's
At
a
all.
comedian last night. He said the Jews are only something small percentage of the world population, and yet we refer to everybody else as non-Jews.
There we go. Exactly.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
which is kind of, yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
You pass me over.
Yeah, okay, so this is the first letter here. It's in his text and studies. It's number 4 of the documents concerning the Jews of Mosul and Kurdistan. I think he has 10. This is number 4. It's a very beautiful long letter in which she's in Mosul and she's appealing to the community of Ahmadiyya. Right, Ahmadiyya is like the center of Kurdistan itself. It's farther up in the mountains. Mosul's farther down, closer towards Baghdad, but it's on the border there. And the big yeshiva that her father founded is in Mosul. And she's appealing to essentially her father's former students, which are now the community leaders all over these regions. She's appealing to Ahmadiyya. She's sending them a letter. The beginning is a whole poem written interlaced with like scripture and yeshiva language and Talmudic language. Clearly, the author of the letter is a major scholar, to the point that I read one historian who said it couldn't have been her who wrote it because of how scholarly it is. All the other historians disagree with him, and they prove why they think so, because of the dating and because of the handwriting and whatever they use. But it's so full and rich of scholarship that there's like at least one historian who was like, this can't be a...
person who underestimates a woman.
Right, she's like, look, given the history, given the culture, it can't be. Anyway, so this is what it reads. It says, there's a rhythm to the poem. Atem chasidim chamluna el teres eli tzuri paili loy el haidi el telasi he priasi I solol. She even changes certain words to make it fit the rhyme. Anyway, it's a very, very lengthy poem, but essentially here she's speaking, you pious ones, please don't forget about me. Listen to my cries. Listen, it's not for my gamlo el tzorach beiti o el malbusha machala. It's not for my own need, for my clothing, for my food. Achel kima medrashis. I'm trying to maintain the schools that they shouldn't be lost, and so on. Okay, so now I want to read to her what she actually writes to them, the storyline. Okay, so I'm just translating, but you can follow along. And now, dear holy community, may peace be upon you. May shalvasam, may like tranquility embrace you, and God should be your strength, your silchem, like your support. God, you should be overflowing with money. Now I'm going to tell you all about my struggles and how I've been beset. I've been held. It seems like she was caught, and I was being held by these Romans. Sorry?
Like put in jail.
Not necessarily. I don't think that means jail literally, but I think she was like interrogated maybe, or maybe arrested or something. By these Romans, I think she means the Christians, these wicked Christians. When my husband, the rabbi, died, and they sent Matzal Katzi, namely a judge, and they took away my house, they took away the key, these heathens, and they sold everything in it. My clothing, the clothing of my daughters, may God protect them, even the books that I had and that came in my possession, and they took that too, and I'm now in a debt of 100 karsh, whatever that is, that the local currency, I suppose. I have no salvation, no refuge to any place except for the mercy of heaven and your mercy that you will bestow upon me. Because of the investment of burying my father, or in honor of the burial of my late father and my late husband, the rabbi, her father being Shmuel, her husband being Yaakov, both of whom were leaders of the yeshiva, right? So in their honor, so that their Torah not be forgotten and their name not be erased from these communities. I have been left, here's the key. Shani nisharti melamedes Torah, I was the one left teaching Torah. I was the one giving rebuke, giving inspiring speeches, v'doreshet, and I was teaching the laws of going to mikvah, Shabbos, nida, prayer, and all the rest of the type of things. And I alone am left with this calamity that have fallen upon me, all of this debt coming to the number mentioned above. So she says here, I'm left now teaching. I'm left now teaching. I'm the one running the yeshiva. I'm teaching the classes now. I need support. Right? I have nothing to sell, she continues, and I have no ben gadol, I have no adult child. She has a son, not an adult son. I have no adult son or messenger that can go throughout the communities to collect. Additionally, it's not appropriate for a woman to be traveling from community to community, because like the pasuk says, the honor of every daughter is to be inward. And gold is her clothing. And me, she continues, here's another thing. She talks about her own self. In my entire life, I never left the door of my home outward. I never left my home. The daughter of Israel, the daughter of the king of Israel, who are the kings, our sages say, is the sages, and therefore I grew up on the knees of the wise. I grew up attached to my father, and my father taught me no other work and no other occupation other than learning, except for the Malach HaShamayim, except for the work of heaven. To fulfill the Gisa B'Yom V'Layla, you shall study day and night. I grew up, my father taught me nothing else but Torah. I never left my house. That's all I did was just, he's teaching me. And with the great sins, due to our sins, he had no sons except for daughters. It says daughters plural, so maybe he had more. Additionally, get this, he made my husband take a vow, my husband being Yaakov, my father made my husband take a vow that he will not make me do any work other than my learning. In other words, don't make her cook, don't make her clean. You want to marry my daughter? No problem, but you have to let her learn. You have to let her learn.
Wow.
And he did indeed do as he was instructed. Now, to start with, my husband too was busy with his own learning, and he had no time to teach the students. So after my father died, I was the one teaching, and I always was like a help in that regard. And now he, in our great sins, he too has now left and is now lays in rest, and he left me and my children, the children in the yeshiva. I'm left alone. No father, no husband.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? It's just like, and it says in her own handwriting. It says nobody.
Heartbreaking.
It's crazy. So her father teaches her Torah all day since she's a kid. When she gets married, her father makes sure she's learning. Her husband's learning, so she's running the yeshiva when her father dies. And now her husband's dead, can't even go collect or whatever, because we do have letters from the husband collecting. So even if he wasn't teaching necessarily, he was certainly involved in the administrative part of the yeshiva, because we have letters in this same collection of him trying to fundraise.
She says herself, it's not proper for the...
It's not, yeah.
Do it until...
Exactly. Until my husband died, I wasn't doing this collection business. I was teaching. That's where I want to be. I'm an academic. I'm a scholar. I'm supposed to be learning and teaching. And now I have to write letters to you to give me support.
They took away the house and the furnishings and the clothes and everything.
Okay, so it's not clear who took away what.
Reason why-
There was some sort of struggle
or
over,
a debt owed maybe, something.
there's an uncle. In one of the other letter comes up that there's an uncle somewhere who, it seems like there's a split in the community between like different supporters, and some of the uncle supporters, I think, end up taking away a bunch of books. We're going to see in the son's letter, he starts complaining about the books that are stolen from him. Anyway, so here's the end of the letter. I think all these dots are because there's like, the text is ripped. But it's another poetic way of, she describes how weak she is and how she has, she's left with all these orphans and she's trying to teach and she can't do this. So please, you have to, I'm beseeching you, please. And she signs her name. So it's missing her name here, which is too bad. Son of Shmuel, that's her father, Levi, of blessed memory. And then your servant, the one who kisses your hands, and it's Shmuel ben Yaakov. Shmuel is now her son, son of Yaakov, her husband. So she signs, and her child's son signs, because she said before she doesn't have an adult son to go around. But her son is already signing, I guess, like he's being groomed that when he's old enough, he'll take the yeshiva, so she doesn't have to carry this burden. But in the meantime, she's stuck with the yeshiva alone, and she's appealing to Amadia to help support.
What's remarkable is that even though this letter wasn't meant to showcase her, how big a...
She wasn't trying to show off her scholarship.
But really...
It comes out.
It really comes out.
Yeah.
Like,
So the poem at the beginning, which only put a little part of it, the entire poem at the beginning, is all like laced with quotes from scripture or from Talmud, from the Gemara, like a really proper Sephardic poetic letter, which is the way the Sephardim used to write, was this kind of poetic language. It really comes through. Okay, so this next letter, that was letter number 4 in this manuscript, in the collection of manuscripts, and this is letter 5. Letter 5 is her son. So her son now is growing up, and he turns back to the community of Amadia, and he writes, peace, grace, kindness be upon the masters from the masters of the world be upon you and the holy city of Kurdistan, especially all the communities of Kurdistan, especially the great, wonderful city, the holy community of Amadia. The higher one and the lower one. I'm guessing there's up a mountain, and maybe Amadia is divided into 2. All your heads, your scholars who are wise, your masters, and so on and so forth, the policemen with the entire community. May your grace be before the one who rests on high. Okay. Amen ken yiratzeh. Now he writes, Madu yatzati, why is it that I've gone out? Ve'enish, no one's responding to me. I'm calling out and no one's answering. I've sent you number of letters, and you guys haven't thought of me anything. From the day my father passed away, you have not remembered his young goizlov, his young birds, his young children. You had no compassion, not on him, not on them, not on your rabbi's students, your rabbi's children, meaning me and my siblings. And all the communities remembered us. I guess the other communities did send funds, but not you guys. And not only that you guys have forgotten, you guys don't remember me, and you haven't responded to my previous letters and appeals. You did even worse these things, and you've added anger to my misfortune. And you've stolen from me all these books that I had, and now they're held captive by the sword, like you guys. And each of you have taken one paper at a time, And on my clothing you made lots, like you guys like casting lots, and who's going to take away more from me? And now this is enough of you guys doing this kind of stuff, especially since Mashiach is going to come very soon.
Who is he writing this to?
To the city of Amadia, to the community in Amadia. And he's asking them, please, you guys have to, change your ways and return everything that you've taken. And then he writes here, there's a great leader and scholar visiting. His name is Rabbi Mattatya Ashkenazi. Everybody knows who he is, and I'm attaching a letter that he's writing, rebuking you guys for the same reasons I'm rebuking you. And this is how we get the dating from this Mattatya, because Mattatya signs his letter as Ben Binyamin Zev Ashkenazi, and there are two Binyamin Zev Ashkenazi, and the question is which one is the Binyamin Zev Ashkenazi being referred to? That's the father of Mattatya, and then that tells you where to place this whole story. So we placed it based on one historian's interpretation, which is actually this Jacob Mann who put together these texts. He posits that based on his writing of who this Binyamin Zev is, and therefore who this Mattatya is, and therefore this happens in the 16th century. Others put it 150 years later. Right? Yeah, some put it like 100 years later. And that would make it more closely linked to the Shabtai Tzvi story, that there would be a cousin connected to Shabtai Tzvi, because Shabtai Tzvi only comes in the scene in 1650s. So, which would make sense there's a little bit later, if that's indeed this cousin. And it's not impossible, because if you put the cousin that's associated with Shabtai Tzvi is a little bit later in the generations than they are. So it could line up with either version, but nonetheless. Okay, so on the right-hand side, this is the conclusion of the son's letter. Hatzair Shmuel, the young one Shmuel, son of Yaakov Mizrahi. And now please hold on to the books, don't touch them, and so I can come and get them, so I can send someone to bring them back to me. Now on the left, this is the letter that that Mattatya sends. He says, this Mattatya Ashkenazi is visiting, he's going to send you guys a letter. This is the letter he writes, and it's a whole rebuking letter, but I just want to show one line here where he says, the heavens have been pierced through, numerous levels of the heavens have been pierced through because of the fact that for so many years you guys have abandoned him meaning Shmuel, the young Shmuel, and his mother, who is Eishes Chaver Hadayim L'Chaver. He's using Talmudic language, basically saying she's the wife of a scholar who herself is like a scholar. You guys forgot about her. Not even one pruta, not even one penny you guys sent her. And you guys are supposed to be compassionate, so please help her and support her. Okay. That tells us the story of this Osnat, which is an incredible, fascinating story. And there's another letter I saw that she writes a whole story about an esrog, and she's complaining that the donor sent her an esrog, and no one told me, and I wrote, not nice to you, and that's because I didn't know that I got another letter, and a letter arrived with an esrog before the holidays, but I only got it near Hanukkah time, and therefore I apologize for writing so not nice to you. You've always been such a supporter. So obviously this issue with supporting the yeshiva is a real struggle for her.
Yeah.
Clearly.
I have to say, the son, if he wants to get any money, that's not a way to write. He's basically...
In those parts of the world, it maybe works.
And saying, help me, but he's cursing them out at the same time.
I think in those parts of the world, they might respond to that better than they do in our parts of the world. Different cultures talk different ways.
Yeah, I'm sure he's writing in this style
that they would appreciate. So he starts off with blessings.
Yes.
Again, also the letter also begins with like this poem, but then he really laces into them. He says, everybody remembered us except for you guys. And remember, they feel that all these yeshivas and all these Jewish infrastructures, all thanks to the yeshiva that they're collecting from their father/grandfather who taught them all. So they really feel slighted. And it comes up in one of the letters that there's an uncle or something who got involved, and maybe he's behind stealing of his books. It's not clear exactly, at least not to me. Okay, let's do a little bit more. I want to do a little bit more on the Sephardic women learning. And this comes from Rabbi Yosef Mesas, a very, very fascinating character. We can do a whole thing just on him, but you can see his picture. These are his pictures here. He's here on the left with Christian leaders. You can see his dates, 1892, and he passes in 1974, so we're not talking about very long ago. Sorry?
Oh, sorry, 74.
Yeah, 1974, not so long ago.
Not so long ago.
Yeah, he was a chief rabbi of Haifa. So you can read here, it says, in 1924, at age 31, he became the rabbi of Tlemcen, Algeria. which is a secular city, but and a lot of his halachic writing actually deals with like how he can make halacha work for his community that isn't super religious. What does he do for that? All kinds of interesting things. Just one example, he allowed the trusting of the butchers even though they weren't Shomer Shabbos. The shochet had to be Shomer Shabbos, but the butchers, he would trust them even if they weren't Shomer Shabbos. And his rationale is because and this is important to understand, his halacha is not, some of his halacha is very, very bold in that regard and very outspoken, and it's not really taken across board for obvious reasons, but just to explain the context in which he's saying it. The Ashkenazi world, even in pre-war Europe, if someone was secular, it was ideological. It means they bought into the Bundists, they bought into the Yidishists, the Zionists, the Socialists, all the ists that exists. And if someone's not Shomer Shabbos, it's because they left the kehillah, they left the community that's controlled and regulated, and they're out doing their own thing on their own ideology. Part of that controversy, he gets into that controversy too, yeah. And which would explain also why in the Orthodox pre-war Ashkenazi world, Zionism was the scariest thing. For many, at least. Not for all, there were the religious Zionists there too, but for a lot of certainly the Hasidic circle and others, Zionism was very scary because it was this new ism that was going to replace Judaism. And in many ways, it's not for now, but in many ways it might have. Sorry? The First World War changed everything, the Second World War changed everything, the creation of the state changed everything. There's a lot of things that changed in the middle, but going back 250 years, that was certainly the case at the time, where Jews were like, oh, this archaic way of identifying as Jews, forget that. This is the new way to identify as a Jew, right? In the Sephardic world, this whole thing didn't exist. And we spoke about this, I think, when we did our first series. First of all, you can make the case that the Sephardim went through their own enlightenment hundreds of years earlier in the 1300s in Spain. They were introduced to Greek philosophy then, way before the Ashkenazim went through their enlightenment. Conversely, the European enlightenment never made it down to North African countries in this time. So if a Jew in Morocco or Algeria North Africa wasn't religious, it wasn't because they were ideological. It's because they weren't keeping everything, right? So we living here in Montreal, we can appreciate this. You can have Jews living in these towns or these places around North Africa where they're not keeping Shabbos, but they're definitely going to attend the Hilula celebration of whatever tzaddik that the whole place is doing a pilgrimage to the gravesite of someone's thing, and they're going and they have to do it. This is the most religious thing they need to do. And like we have in some of the writings where like they're going and lighting fires on Shabbos, like candles, so they're like violating Shabbos to do this like religious thing of honoring a tzaddik. It's not coming from a place of ideological secularism. It's not because it's right. They're not against Judaism. They're just either a combination of ignorant or a combination of whatever the circumstances are that didn't give them the proper education to understand what Judaism is and how you're supposed to perform it. There's nothing against it, right? So Rabbi Masas would have argued, he does argue, well, so you want me to now say that this guy's not trusted for kosher meat? Like he's not anti-Jewish. He's not going to like throw non-kosher meat in there. So just because he happens to not be Shomer Shabbos doesn't mean he's not, which is a bold thinking. It
still takes a lot of trust.
It takes a lot of trust, but it takes also a lot of courage on Masas's side to say something like that, and he was respected for it. He was of the philosophy that a lot of the Sephardic leading thinkers felt that way too, and obviously in Chabad is very similarly reflected, that you don't want to turn all of your constituents into wicked people. They're not going to listen to you anymore. You lost them. You make a proclamation that all you guys who aren't doing this are all wicked, they're going to be like, okay, bye. We're not listening to you ever again. So he wants to like say, no, you guys aren't wicked. You just have to learn a little bit more. You're not Rishayim, you're not bad people. You just got to learn a little bit more, right? That's his thinking. Okay, so he's very bold in that way. So he becomes a dayan. He goes back to his hometown, which is Menkes. He becomes a dayan there. He wrote tons. He gave big speeches. A poet, an artist. You see this in the center here? That's his art. This is his art, actually. He would draw the covers of his books, which is interesting. Poetry, he wrote like poems for Yom HaTzmaut, for example, Zionist poems, all kinds of poems like that. And he made his big halachic ruling. He wrote 48 books. Right, okay, so I mentioned this, understanding the Sephardic world of non-observant doesn't mean secular like we have it. Okay, this is Yosef Massas. His speeches are given on Shabbos afternoon, and certainly, at least back in Algeria, he's teaching Pirkei Avos. So here are some selections from speeches on Pirkei Avos. I'm going to add a little bit more, he says. The name of his book is Nachlat Avot, and that's his commentary, or it's transcripts of his speeches he's giving on Pirkei Avos. Full of stories, full of Moroccan history and Sephardic history. Very nice to read sermons. And they're very intriguing because he's a good storyteller and good ideas and good thoughts and insights. It's nice. So he writes, I'll add a little bit more. I'm quoting. It's the way of kosher women, like good upright women, to wake up early before their husbands, prepare them coffee, and then they go wake up their husbands that they should go serve their creator, and they serve him the cup of coffee in order to bring back, prep his mind, make him sharp so that he can pray properly. And like King Solomon says about good Jewish women, right? That's the pasuk we say in the Eshes Chayil, which comes from Shlomo HaMelech, and says she wakes up at night and she provides for her household. So wake up early and make your husband coffee. That is to say, you got to prepare mezainis, you got to prepare for food for your home. And the main part of the home is her husband. And the verse goes on to say she prepares instruction for her young people, meaning she teaches them, the ones that work with her in the wool or any other work that she's doing, in cleaning, in sewing, in weaving, so that when morning comes to work, everyone will find what they have to get done. She's organized, everybody knows what they have to do in the household, because she's preparing everything for them before they even get up. Okay, so this is how his introduction is about what a good woman looks like. Now, wake up early, prepare your husband coffee and cake, make sure that everybody's got their chores set out for the day. Then he says, this is interesting. I found in a book, he's constantly quoting books, and we don't know what their books are, but he's quite a bit in his he had a massive library and an incredible memory, clearly. Just from his writings, you can see that, and he talks about how he saw in this book and that book. He was like a historian and collected a lot of the stuff. So he says, I saw in a book that there were certain places in Spain, so this is way back, right? There were good kosher women who were somewhat learned, malamades, they were learned. They would wake up early, very early, and they would go to their own shuls, the basic nesa shalahem. They would go to their own shuls. They would daven there with a minyan. One of them would be the shliach tzibur, the chazan, one of these women. They would take out a Torah. There were even those who would wear tefillin. Each one of them would be wearing a talis. That's what they would do on Shabbos and Yom Tov also. And after they finished their prayers, they would go back to their home, wake up their husbands, wake up their sons, that they can go to daven in shul. And this they did because they were being more stringent upon themselves, because of course women are exempt from all these mitzvahs that are time bound. And they would do it early in the morning so that they can be available to help their husbands, and that's why they would wake up while their husbands were still sleeping. So it's funny. It's like this. It's this mix of like women empowerment, where he's like, yeah, you got their own shuls, they're wearing tefillin, they're taking out the Torah. But it was also, they did it early so they can come back and wake their husbands up, make sure he has his coffee and cake. It's interesting.
That women are going to learn from this, that they can be scholars in their own right, and say no, but
I don't know. It's funny. It's a very funny description. Like you could imagine, if a modern feminist wanted to quote this as a source for what women used to do, she'd have to cut out the exact lines they want, because in the larger context, it's funny. It's interesting. It's certainly very interesting. So this is what he writes. Okay, so now, interestingly enough, we have, so he's writing about shuls in Spain, right? That shuls in Spain, women had their own shuls, wake up early, daven, somewhere in tefillin even. Sorry?
The same guy, the
Yosef Massas is saying this. Yosef Massas is saying this in one of his speeches, which he writes and publishes in a book, so he's happy that we're repeating it. This comes from a couple hundred years earlier, right? Now we're going back to actually not so, 100 years earlier, 1724 to 1806, the Chida, the famous Chida, Chaim Yosef David Azulai, also somewhat of a historian. He travels around all over Europe, meets all kinds of people, and he writes a travelogue called Ma'agal Tov. Now he writes, on the 4th day of Av, Thursday, after davening, we traveled from Avignon to Cavaillon. So you can see on the right where we are. That's in Provence. Provence is an interesting region in terms of Jewish life. It's a sort of blend between Ashkenazi and Sephardi, right? Sephardi being to the left, Spain, and Ashkenaz being up to the right, Germany and France. And this region, Provence, is a mix. Sometimes Jews ran away from there, sometimes Jews ran to there. It's got its own it's like its little own sector of Jewish history within the larger European story. So we traveled from Avignon to Cavaillon, and we traveled with these people, Elia Speer, Elia Amflunt, Yosef David, Yochanan Muntnitz, whatever. We came there before midday. We were put up in the home of Yisrael Kohen. Now, the shuls here are similar to that of Carpinterans, whatever that is. Some other, maybe Carpentras he means, like Carpentras, that area, that city, and Avignon. So in Cavaillon, it's the same thing as Avignon and the other place. Now, underneath the synagogues of all the above-mentioned communities, there is a separate shul for women. And they have these kind of like skylights in the floor so that they can see the Sefer Torah from their synagogue below through these like skylights. And they have their own chazan, a male chazan, who reads the tefillos out loud in the language they know. So I don't know if it's just talking about the same thing that he doesn't describe as like, maybe it's a women's section, but it doesn't sound like a women's section. It sounds like their own shul with like a skylight that they can see. And it doesn't seem like they're davening along with the men. They're davening themselves, meaning like, there's like in the floor of the men's synagogue, there's a skylight going down to the women's section, to the women's, he doesn't call it women's section, it's a women's shul, where they daven on their own. They're not davening with the men through that.
Separate Baal Tefillah, apparently.
Yes, so that who's reading the davening in their language, in whatever they spoke there, I guess French or whatever they were speaking, maybe Yiddish, I don't know.
It's like a basement, you said it's underneath.
It's underneath the shuls. It says all the shuls in this region have it.
And that's the women's section.
Very interesting. So maybe this is what Masas is referring to, something similar to this, where they have like their own section and their own prayers, and maybe at some point in time they did have their own women doing it, not a man doing it for them. Maybe certain groups had women doing it for them, some men, I don't know. But this is certainly very interesting.
I never heard of such a thing.
I didn't until I did the research for this too. Okay, so now finally, now he describes another one of these speeches written in the same book. He describes two incredible stories. We don't have time to get into the whole thing, but essentially, he's quoting the verse which said the Mishnah which says, "Whoever kol ha'osek b'Torah l'shmo zarech lo dvarim harbe." Whoever delves into the study of Torah for its own sake merits many things. And he argues that it's a whole list of things a person merits, whole list. And he argues, correctly, this is most common understanding of the Mishnah, that it doesn't mean, these aren't the rewards in the classic sense of God's rewarding you. That's in the world to come or whatever. He's talking about character building that comes as a result of learning Torah properly. That's what the Mishnah really speaks of, like the character building that comes automatically. And therefore he says, this has nothing to do with actual reward. And therefore he says, a woman who will learn will get the same thing. And he adds, that's why the Mishnah adds, kol ha'isek. Anyone, all who learn, as opposed to just saying, one who learns, ha'isek. Kol ha'isek, everyone, meaning even women, because even though we learned in a couple classes ago that a woman who learns Torah, she may, but she gets no reward because she's not commanded. But these things, which is character building, she will get. Because anybody who will learn Torah, even if you're not rewarded, will still get this because it's character building that you'll get. Okay?
This is opposite to what we learned a few times ago.
Right, so that's why
Completely opposite.
he's making a distinction.
Yeah.
The reward that the Mishnah says you're not getting because you're not commanded, that's the reward in the classic sense, the world to come.
There was that word he used.
Oh, it's promiscuity.
Yes, the promise.
So he doesn't touch that at all.
What was the word in Hebrew?
Tiflus.
Tiflus, yeah.
He doesn't mention all of that.
Okay.
But then he says you should know there's plenty of women who learned, and he puts down a whole list of women who learned here, including some of Rashi's grandkids that we talked about. He mixes up one of the names here. He puts Chana, that scholar Chana we met a couple of weeks ago, he puts her as a sister of the wrong person, but we met both of them anyway. And then he goes on to say stories about women in the Sephardic world who learned. Incredible stories. Okay, so we'll try to read the stories moving it along. So I found in a book, he says, in the city of Algeria, during the time of Rabbi Ayish, there was this young maiden who was very good looking, daughter of a very wealthy man, and she was very smart in Torah learning, and she was night and day, all day learning. Many young suitors were, honorable suitors were pursuing her, and she didn't want any of them. She didn't want to marry anybody, because the Mishnah says, quoting a famous person, Ben Azai, actually Ben Azai is the one who said a woman is allowed to learn. Actually, a woman is obligated to learn, as Ben Azai. So she quotes Ben Azai, which says, Ben Azai said, I never want to get married because I want my entire life devoted to Torah. She says, I'm the same way. I don't want to marry anybody. And she added, the mitzvah, flips it around, the mitzvah to have children is on the man, not the woman. So I don't have to get married. They have to. They can find someone else. I don't need to get married. So that's it. I'm just going to learn Torah. Ben Azai, who is commanded to do Torah, to have children, for skip that mitzvah because he wanted to learn. Certainly me, I'm not obligated. I'm going to stay and learn. And she, the Rambam said that a woman who learns gets reward, not as great as the husband, not as great as a man, but she still gets reward, so she's allowed to, she wants to, and so on. The father tries to bring her to the local rabbi to convince her to get married, and he is persuaded by her arguments, and she says, okay, leave her alone, let her learn. Okay, so now this scholar who was trying to convince her, this Rabbi Ayish, who was trying to convince her to get married, but she convinced him that she doesn't have to get married, sees in his dream. And in his dream, he sees that there are raiders coming towards the city of Algiers. This is in her dream. In his dream. And in his dream, he sees her, this girl who's learning, alone, going out there with a sword in her hand toward these raiders, and she subdues them all. And this is a great salvation. And the rabbi was completely, blown away from this dream, and he fasted. And indeed, 3 days later, on Friday night, there was indeed a raid from the Spanish, which is not uncommon. The Spanish would try to come raid Ottoman North Africa, and this happened often. We'll talk about that in a second. So indeed, 3 days later, this happens, and by God's grace, there was a big windstorm, hurricane, and all their ships drowned, and the entire place was saved. And the rabbi knew it was all thanks to her learning. Story number one. Okay, so if we skip a page to here, so just a little bit, this is Rabbi Ayish, who he's talking about, in the 1700s to 1760s, so he lives somewhere there. There's another book written around the same time called Tachachas Musar, written by a Jew named Rabbi Sadia wrote this book called Tachachas Musar. His son, Rabbi Sadia's son, Rabbi Yosef, writes in the introduction. He writes about something called Purim Sheni, the second Purim. Second Purim is essentially communities that have their own personal story that they got saved from something, would mark it with their own Purims. So he's writing about Purims that Algiers commemorates. So he says that there were a number of times when the Español, that the Spanish tried to come invade the Ishmaelim, the Arabs in our lands, and they wanted to kill us all, and God saved us many times. The last time this happened, says Rabbi Yosef, was in the time of my grandfather, the great Rabbi Nahorai. And he wrote a prayer in something called the Kruvitz. Kruvitz is like these pamphlets that they would publish different prayers to the community. So my grandfather Nahorai wrote a special poem prayer in this Kruvitz for the community of Algiers. Until today, they make this day, Yud Aleph Tammuz, 11th of Tammuz, a Purim because of the salvation when they were invaded by the Spanish and they were saved. And it's around the same time of Rabbi Ayish. Rabbi Nahorai lives in the 1700s, Rabbi Ayish lives in the 1700s also. So maybe it's the same one. This is brought to me by an article written by a professor named Tzvi Zohar. He tries to connect the two, although he argues that this Rabbi Ayish left from Algeria to Israel before this story happened, because as you can see on the left here, okay, it's hard to read it, but it's a French calendar, essentially. Yeah, you can see it. Revue des Écoles de l'Alliance Israélite. It's some sort of calendar that goes through events that exist within the community. And they say here, Le Purim du 11 Tammuz, I don't speak French, but the Purim that's on the 11th of Tammuz that happened to the victory of Muhammad ben Aman in the year of 1774. So the grandson, Yosef, what's his last name? Yosef Azobiv, doesn't write when it happened. He just says it happened in the time of his grandfather, Rabbi Naharai. If it's the same story, this happens in 1774, which would be after Rabbi Ayesh leaves Algeria and goes to Israel. So maybe the timeline in Rabbi Masas's story is messed up, or maybe it's a different time that this happened, or maybe this is the same one. And just that this woman lived in the time of Rabbi Ayesh, but the miracle happened sometime later. So, it's just funny to see a corroborating sort of story that might line up from different sources. Rabbi Masas describing this woman who, at least according to the rabbi in his dream, saved the city, and here's a record of the same community from around that same time being saved by a Spanish invasion, and they're celebrating Purim because of it, a second Purim on the 11th of Tammuz. So that's quite interesting. And then finally, the other story that he says here, this is a very cool story. It also says there, continued, now back to Rabbi Masas's speech. He's giving a speech talking about why women should be learning. The Mishnah, which says anyone who learns gets merited to all these great qualities, that includes women, Rabbi Masas argues. So story number one is this rich girl who learns all day long and saves the community as the rabbi sees in the dream. Second story. In that same book I read that in the town of Tlemcen, which he was rabbi, the red dot here showing where Tlemcen is, Algiers is on the right there. So the first story happened on the right in Algiers. This story is happening right here where the red dot is, Tlemcen. I think I'm pronouncing it right. So in Tlemcen, there was a young maiden, very beautiful, and she wanted to learn. Her parents were very poor, extremely poor. Tons of children, boys and girls to take care of, and they lived an impoverished life. One day, there comes from the city of Vaharan, I don't know what that is, there comes a young man he's a widower, right? He lost his wife. A young man though, and he's extremely wealthy. And he speaks to the father of the young girl, I want to marry your daughter. And he says, if you give me your daughter to marry, I'm going to give you tons. And your entire household will eat on my expense all the rest of your lives. The parents are obviously very excited. Wow, this guy's coming, and now we can marry our daughter off to a wealthy guy and be taken care of. But when they told her about it, she didn't want. She said, I want to learn Torah. I'm not interested in getting married. The parents fall on their feet, and they're crying, and they're beseeching her, please look at your brothers and sisters who are all poor. You have the chance now to save them all. So when she couldn't get rid of them, she asked, please give me 3 days, and I'm going to consider it. They let her go and let her consider it. She fasted for 3 days. As she's crying, she's praying to Hashem, please open up my mind to know what to do. God heard her prayers and saw her cries, and on the third day, on midnight, she sees in her dream, another dream. And there's an announcement being informed to her in a dream, telling her that there's this great treasure hidden underground, underneath where she is sleeping. She wakes up in the middle of the night, she tells her father, and she's 100% certain that she's correct. She got a hammer, a shovel, a pitch, and she starts digging right under her bed. About 2 feet down, 2 amas down, 2 cubits down, she finds a earthenware pot full of golden coins. No one knew about it. She's very, 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 very happy. And it came in the morning, and she told the young man who wanted to marry her. The father tells the young man, my daughter doesn't want to marry you. Thank you very much for the offer. And he goes off on his way. The father takes a certain amount of the gold that was in this treasure, does some business, and does very well, and they lived a life of pleasure, peace, and so on. This daughter found her peace in the walls of Torah study as she wanted, and this is the enjoyment that she appreciated in this world. As far as the world to come, I have no idea, but I'm sure it was just as great there. This is the second story. So he tells us 2 stories about Sephardic women who were really major scholars, one of which saves a city, another one who, it's an inverted story because she starts off poor and she ends up being rich thanks to her great study. Okay, I'm going to conclude with this, which is from the Chida, the Ben Ish Chai. So he lives in 1834, 1909, Baghdad. It doesn't tell us so much about scholarship, but it's very interesting. This is a responsa, and he's asked, women who know how to read Tanakh, and they daven every single day, they pray every day, is it appropriate for them to wake up midnight and do the Tikkun Chatzos? The female version of the Tikkun Chatzos. Tikkun Chatzos is a midnight prayer that Kabbalists would read. Maybe there are people who still do it today, I'm sure. And they do it to like mourn over the temple and beseech Hashem that Mashiach should come. So there's a female version of it called Tikkun Rachel and Tikkun Leah. So they're asking the Ben Ish Chai, the famous Ben Ish Chai, they're asking, are women who know how to read and they daven every day, why should they wake up at midnight and do this? Question 1. Question 2 is, if women should say Shema before they go to bed. And number 3 is, should the women be up on Shavuos night learning all night and Hoshana Rabbah? So he writes, look, when it comes to, he gets one by one. He says, as far as Tikkun Chatzos goes, I never heard of such a thing. I never saw women doing it. Even though they were very wise and learned women, I haven't seen it. Even women who have set study schedules, I haven't seen them do this. And he gives a whole a Kabbalistic explanation why they shouldn't be doing Tikkun Chatzos. And then he says over here, the custom in the women in our house is that they wake up very early and they don't say Tikkun Chatzos, but they learn sections of the Zohar and some other learnings like that. And my grandmother, he says, she had a system of learning every single day 18 Mishnahs. There's a certain parallel here to Masas's story, where they're waking up very early and doing their learning then. And he's saying that's the women in my household do. They wake up early, they have their Zohar they learn, and my grandmother still had a system of learning 18 Mishnahs every day. Interesting. Question number 2, of course, they should say Shema every night. And finally, question 3 about whether they should do the Shavuos, learning Shavuos night and Hoshana Rabbah, right, the night before. So he says, the custom in my house is that the women do not do the learning on Shavuos night, they sleep. But on the night of Hoshana Rabbah, they do stay up, and they do learn Devarim and Tehillim, which is what the men do. They learn Devarim and they say Tehillim. And there's other prayers they do, and this is how it's done. We sit in the sukkah, the men sit in the sukkah in our backyard, and they sit up on the balcony right above, and from there, they learn the same time we're learning and the same things we're learning, us in the sukkah and them on the balcony. So this is, obviously this is not a full rounded picture to say about all women scholars in Sepharad, especially since actually the most famous of them, which I hope we'll have time to do next week, I don't know, because there's a few that I'd like to cover next week, is the famous Rabbanit Flora Sasson, who was a major player in the 20th century, huge wealthy woman, an aristocrat who was a major scholar too, who used to host scholars in her home and discuss Torah. So certainly there's more to the story of women's scholarship in Sfarad. But nonetheless, what you see, at least from all these different places, well, first you have the story of the Kurdistani woman. That's just an outlier. And I'm not even sure if you can put that in the Sephardic category at all. But certainly what we're seeing from both Rabbi Mesas, the Chida, and the Ben Ish Chai, who are describing women waking up early and learning, there is the outliers of these two women who are lived in this aesthetic lifestyle, learning and not getting married and whatnot. But it seems more like the style here is, it has a certain Sephardic flavor, let's just say, women waking up early and then learning in their own, and davening in their own shuls, as opposed to when we saw let's say in the Ashkenazi learners, we saw them talking to their husbands and learning, and the Rabbi was consulting with his aunts about what they would do, and Chana is instructing the ladies. That looks more like Osnat than it does like these women who are actually probably more predominantly wives than they are scholars, but have their own learning on the side as righteous, good women. They wake up early, they do their learning. I think it's a little bit of a different style. And living here in Montreal, where we live in these two worlds, I think we can kind of see how this difference might play out even till today.
Interesting. I watched a podcast this week of a woman who was she was born in Texas, Christian, and she taught herself. So she realized that Christianity wasn't a religion of truth, and she wanted to find the truth. So she experimented with a few others, and then the fourth religion I think she came to was Judaism. She taught herself how to read in Hebrew. And
I just heard about this recently.
yeah, it's from Meaningful People podcast.
1 second, she went back to Spain to discover her family's roots.
No.
It's a different woman. It's a woman who discovered her family's roots back to Spain. She traveled there to find To try to prove that she's
actually a goy.
documentedly
She's
Jewish.
actually a goy.
Okay.
And she discovered Judaism on her own. No, just to say that she knew the Bible from
Right.
having studied. She knew the Bible very, very well. So how did she get convinced that Judaism is a true religion? She taught herself how to read Torah, and she learned the Torah.
In the
and
original
that's how-
Hebrew. That's interesting.
And that's in the original Hebrew. She was in Vanderbilt University. It was a whole interesting. She said she went originally to become a Christian missionary. That was going to be
Her goal.
mission in life, and she's now. You see her on the podcast. She doesn't wear a sheitel. She wears like a spitzel
Yeah.
with a tichel. Beautiful.
Oh, wow.
And so intelligent, and obviously knows a lot. And it was very interesting. And what was so interesting was her father is a guy. And when he came, and she married a Baal Tshuva in Mexico, and they have a few children. They live in Israel now, and he's a scholar in the Mir.
Oh, wow.
She says that her father came, and they were struggling, like they couldn't make ends meet. They had a few children, they couldn't and the father says, "I said, you've told me." He tells the husband, "You've told me that you have to read these books, and these books are, but the economics are not letting you read these books. So your rent, I'm going to start paying your rent from now on."
Oh, wow.
This is a
He supported her learning. That's pretty
really
incredible.
Yeah, it really is.
That's pretty incredible. I actually was thinking of going down to like the modern world, but I don't think we'll be able to. Next week I want to do. There's 3 women that I want to do. One is a woman who became a Hasidic Rebbe back in Ukraine.
Really?
Yep, she became a Hasidic Rebbe. We'll hear her story. Very fascinating story. Number 2 is you can't do women's scholarship and not include Sarah Schneer, the founder of Beis Yaakov. You can't. It's just not. You can't say women in Torah scholarship and not talk about Sarah Schneer. So I want to talk about her, and I'm hoping also to talk about this Flora Sassoon, who I mentioned just now.
A little longer, though.
But there's a lot more, obviously. I did not realize how much I would learn in doing all this. So
Yeah, it really is.
yeah, thank you all, and Visit Shem will continue next week.